Okay, so the last video in the still life series is going to be about rendering, and it's going to be about taking your renders from this, which is just the straight render out of Arnold, and dressing them up a little bit to make them look something like that. The difference is kind of subtle here, but there's a few things that I think can really help add to the feel of a polished render. So that's what we're going to worry about right now. So I'm going to start by here's my robot render, which is just straight out of Maya. I'm going to open that with Photoshop. And the first thing I'm going to do is double click on the background, and I can still call it, yeah, that'll work. I'm just going to copy it and hide the original, just so I have a backup. I like to try to work as non-destructively as possible in Photoshop. So the first thing that I want to cover is that ambient occlusion render that we did. So first thing I need to do is add it to my scene. So I'm just going to find it in Finder and drag it into Photoshop. They are the same size. I'm just going to hit return to lock it in because its default position is exactly what I needed. And so what we need to do is we need to blend these two layers together. And that should be the hint as to what we're going to do. What we're going to do is change the blending mode. And I'm just going to change the blending mode from normal to multiply. That's what I want. Multiply. Okay. And we can toggle this layer on and off if you want to see the before and after. You can see how just giving a little bit more shadow detail really helps bring that depth out. If we could see the feet of the robot, that would be a real kind of selling point for this effect, as it just makes it a little bit more convincing. The ambient occlusion is applied, and you can again adjust the opacity if you want to dial that back a little bit. I'm just going to keep it at 100%. The next effect that I want to add is something called chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration is results from flaws in lenses of real cameras. Not all lenses do it. A lot of them do, especially on the cheaper end. This is an example of chromatic aberration. You can see there's a kind of a magenta fringing on one side and a greenish teal fringing on the other side. And the reason that happens is because different wavelengths of light get kind of refracted by lenses different amounts, and so you get this separation of colors. Here's a really extreme example of it. You can see that blue fringing. Another really extreme example of it. This in a subtle way to our renders. I stress subtle. I'm going to, we've got our duplicated kind of background layer, so this will work. What we want to do is we want to go to this Channels tab, and you can see we've got the RGB channel, the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel, which are all black and white, but together they form the full color. But what we're going to do is we're going to distort the green and the blue channel a little bit, and that's going to give us some separation. So the way that we're going to do it, there's a few different ways you can do it, but the way that we're going to do it is with the camera raw filter. See, Shift Command A is a shortcut on Apple. I would assume it's Control Shift A on Windows. But you just go to the filter menu, camera raw filter. So with the green channel selected, I'm going to go to my camera raw filter. This is going to open up, and we're going to go to the lens corrections tab. Okay, it looks like a bunch of lens elements is the one just to the left of effects. And what we're going to do is just going to set distortion to -1 for green. Again, subtle. You can do -2. I'll do -2 to show you the effect, but it's probably going to be too much. You can see how the image warps a little bit. -2, there we go. So the image does warp a little bit. That's actually what this is doing. I mean, you generally use this to correct lenses because lenses do this sort of thing naturally. And so this is to counteract that. So if you've got a fisheye lens where everything kind of looks like this, then you can use this correction to counteract that. But we're actually going to use it to our advantage. So I'll do -2 to make it more evident on the internet. Or, there we go. Okay, and then with the blue channel, we're going to do double that. So select blue, filter, camera raw filter, lens corrections, and we'll do -4, which is definitely going to feel extreme. Once I have that, I can click back on the RGB channel, go back to layers, and now we can see some chromatic aberration. So I'll hit Command+ to zoom in a little bit, and we can focus here's where it's really evident. Zooming in here, you can see the effect. If you go too far, it can just make everything seem really blurry. You can see the blue fringe right here. It's not a 100% accurate way to do it, but it's close enough, I'll say. And you can, again, dial back that opacity. Well, we want to, if we duplicate our original layer, I should be naming these. I'll call it base, and this will be called, I'll call it CA for chromatic aberration, and I'll call this base copy. Okay, and this I'll just call ambient occlusion. So if you have a kind of an untouched layer underneath it, then you can just dial back the opacity of the chromatic aberration layer to dial in the effect. Again, I'm just going to keep it at 100%. So that's the kind of the last of the more complicated bits. There's just a handful of things that are all pretty quick that I want to cover. The next thing is going to be just a little bit of light color grading. So we've got this adjustments panel, and these are adjustment layers, which are non-destructive ways to, adjust various attributes. So color, highlights, all sorts of things. So the first thing I want to worry about is we have this gradient map adjustment layer. So I'm going to click on that. And so what it does is it maps kind of the highlights and the shadows to a gradient. And this is the gradient that's currently loaded up, but you can see there's a bunch of preset gradients. If you want to create your own gradient, you can do that too. I believe, yeah, you just click on the little gear icon, click New Gradient. You can create your own. I'm going to use this purple and orange one, and this is very extreme. I know this is not going to be the final look, by no means. What we're going to do is we're going to set the blending mode here. Okay, that's again layers where it says normal. You can kind of hover over them and see different blending modes. I like soft light for this. You can also do like overlay, but I like soft light. It's a good subtle effect, and then I'm still going to bring that opacity down a little bit, and you can toggle the visibility on and off to see the before and after. Gradient maps and kind of color overlays can help make everything feel a little bit more cohesive. Every film is color corrected and color graded. Again, yeah, it helps things feel cohesive, and it can help set a mood. If this was, actually don't really have, here, we can do this. If this was the Matrix, it would be like it would be a very green, if we call it Matrix, and then we can set this to like a green. We'll say like that. And this is just kind of a greenish black. Turn that back on. Okay, and now we have a very matrixy feeling. That's super matrix right there. Maybe we'll keep it for this. So you can really kind of set that mood. If you turn this to blue, it's going to feel more like night. Think of any of the night scenes in The Lord of the Rings. Those are all very blue. Yeah, lots of control there. Next thing is, this overlay might make the background a little bit too dark, so we can go back to adjustments. And if we go to curves, so the curves adjustment layer, so we have this line, and then we have a histogram back here, which is showing the amount of different values in the scene. So on the left here are all the shadows, all the blacks, the really dark values. On the right here are the whites, the highlights, the brighter values. And then we can affect them by adjusting this line. So I can add a point and kind of drag up, and that's going to bring up the shadows. It's going to lift the shadows, brighten them up a little bit. I can, do the same. If I want to make the highlights really bright, I can push them this way. If you go too far, then you get this weird grayscale thing. So it's definitely one of those things where a light touch is what you're looking for. I just want to bring up those shadows a little bit, something like that. The last big thing that I want to do is add a vignette to this. And so there's a few different ways that you can do it. You can just take a very lightly opaque brush. If we just do it like a black B for brush, and we set that opacity really low, you can just kind of darken the corners. I don't really like that way. The way that I prefer to do it, I'll delete this layer too, is down here at the bottom of the layers we have this like half-tone circle, and we have a solid color option. So I'm going to add a black solid color fill layer, and then I'm going to select the layer mask, and I'm going to grab the circle marquee, so you can left click and hold to see all of your marquee options, elliptical marquee tool, and I'm going to click and drag across from corner to corner. It's going to give me my ellipse. I do have my feather set to 200, so you need to make sure you get a nice large feather on that. You may need to redraw the circle. Once you have that, then you can use the paint bucket to fill in the center in black. You can see how the mask updates here. And now we have this vignette. Let me add another solid color just so you can see. Oops. Let me get rid of that layer mask. Okay, so here's what that vignette is doing. So it's darkening the edges and leaving the center of the image a little bit brighter. And it just helps kind of focus the eye in on the scene. Again, you've got a lot of flexibility here. So you can bring that opacity down, maybe something like 20%. And again, just toggle that on and off. It doesn't take much. It's an effect that tends to be better when you don't notice it. It's just enough to kind of draw your eye away from the corners and into the image. This is just a broad general vignette. You could also, if I delete this layer mask and just like do a nice oval around my subject, and then click the mask button here again. There's a different sort of layer mask. Oh, I need to invert it, so that's just, I'm going to select that layer mask, Command I to invert it. You can kind of see if you really want to isolate that particular spot, but I'm going to keep the more broad vignette there just to help draw the eye. And then, from there, it's whatever else that you want to do to help it feel polished. Maybe you have a texture scene that you don't want, so you can bring up your healing brush, and then make sure you select the layer, and then you can just, I don't need to do that, but okay, kind of drag across. That's not what I want. spot healing brush. That's what I want. And kind of drag across whatever seams or imperfections you don't want, and then Photoshop will do its best to kind of hide them. Obviously, that's not a seam that I want to hide. That's something that I like, but you have that flexibility to create or fix any render errors that occurred. Maybe you have a couple of little firefly, bright pixels that you need to clean up, then you can use the spot healing brush to clean those up. Maybe I don't like the highlights in the eyes, and I can just try to get rid of those with the probably healing brush in this case. Grab like that, and then we can hide and something like that. So you can use Photoshop to a full extent to kind of finalize the image and get it to where you want it to be.